is perfect. If you look back in Exodus, or not Exodus, in Genesis 17, God calls Abraham the father of many nations.
Right.
And he tells him he'll be exceedingly fruitful. But then Abraham, initially, I mean, we know Paul said later Abraham didn't consider the deadness of his own body,
Right.
or the deadness of Sarah's womb. But initially he did. Because he said, Lord, what will you give me seeing I have no heir?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing I go without a child? And then he went and tried to bring about a seed. Well, God says to Abraham, walk before me and be thou perfect.
Right.
Okay, so for Abraham to be perfect isn't meaning that Abraham would never do anything wrong. It's meaning that Abraham would appear as the father of many nations. Okay?
Okay.
So how does Abraham walk before God? What he did was he recognized that his sufficiency to appear as the father of many nations was not of himself, but it was of God.
Right.
That's why it says he fell on his face before God. Falling on his face before God was him acknowledging, you're right, Lord, you are my sufficiency. God's come to cause us to believe that he is our sufficiency. Mm-hmm. So in other words, whenever we would consider our sufficiency, we wouldn't consider ourselves, but instead we'd consider the Lord. Right? Most of us, when we consider our sufficiency, we consider ourselves, or what we see in our own life,
sure,
or what we see as our own ability.
Yeah.
Well, God wants us, when we think of our sufficiency, to think of his sufficiency as if it were ours.
Right.
Not as a separate guy, and that guy has a sufficiency, and that has nothing to do with me.
Right.
But that in believing on him as our sufficiency, we would see his sufficiency as if it was our sufficiency. Right? Mm-hmm. And then we begin thinking like that. So be thou perfect means God's come and called us all his children.
Right.
Now, to be perfect would be to walk before what God said. So he's come and said, listen, you guys are my children. Your ability to appear as my children and to find my fruit manifesting in you is not of yourselves, but it is of me and my grace. And the way we would be perfect is by agreeing with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's how we would be perfect.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.